I got emotionally involved with someone else while married, and now I don't know how to fix anything. I never imagined I'd be the kind of person to feel this way, drawn to someone else while married, feeling emotions I shouldn't, thinking thoughts I swore I would never think, but here I am, sitting at my desk after work, phone buzzing, staring at a message from Alex, my coworker, and wondering how everything spiraled so fast. Alex joined our team about 6 months ago. On paper, he was just another new hire, competent, polite, friendly, but there was something in the way he smiled, the way he listened, the subtle humor in his messages, that made me feel noticed, really noticed, the kind of attention I hadn't realized I was missing. At first, it was harmless, work-related messages, shared coffee breaks, a joke or two that only we understood. I told myself it was normal, bonding with a colleague, and honestly, it was. But the first time I realized I was looking forward to seeing him more than I looked forward to seeing my husband, I felt a flicker of panic in my chest. No, this isn't right. I tried to ignore it. I went home, hugged my husband, reminded myself of all the reasons I loved him, the way his hands fit mine perfectly, his silly jokes, how he always knew when I needed comfort. But when Alex texted me later that evening, I felt a thrill I hadn't felt in years. That fluttering in my chest, the subtle rush of excitement, the electricity of being understood, it was addictive. I convinced myself it was fine. We didn't touch, we didn't meet outside of work, nothing physical, just emotional connection, just someone who listened and cared in a way I hadn't realized I needed. The first real crack in the facade came on a Friday night. My husband had gone to visit his family for the weekend. I should have been relieved for a quiet evening, but instead, I found myself texting Alex. One message turned into a string of confessions, small doubts, fears, personal frustrations. The thrill was intoxicating, but the guilt was immediate and suffocating. I stared at my phone, heart pounding, whispering to myself, "Oh my God, I shouldn't be telling him this." But I did, and the next day, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. Every little detail replayed in my head, every word, every emoji, every nuance of his response. I hated myself for it, yet part of me craved it more than anything. Over the next few weeks, I noticed subtle changes in myself. I smiled at my phone at odd times. I laughed at messages I hadn't received yet. My thoughts drifted to Alex during conversations with my husband, during dinners, even in the middle of work meetings. The thrill of connection was addictive, and the guilt was a constant undertow. One evening, my husband noticed. "You seem distracted lately. Everything okay?" I froze. I wanted to lie. I wanted to say fine, but the truth, even half-truths, were starting to feel like they had teeth. "I don't know," I admitted finally, voice barely above a whisper. "I feel disconnected. From everything, from everyone, I guess." He frowned, hurt in his eyes, but didn't press, and that scared me more than anything. The realization that secrets, even tiny ones, can grow into something all-consuming if left unchecked. I tried to stop texting Alex. I set boundaries. I told myself it was temporary, that I was just tired, that I could handle this. But when his name appeared on my phone screen, I couldn't resist. The thrill of connection was too strong. The emotional pull was undeniable. One night, after another long text thread, I lay awake in bed, penny curled at my feet, and whispered to the darkness. "I'm in love with him, or at least, I feel something I shouldn't. What the hell am I doing?" And that's when I realized, emotional affairs aren't about what you do, they're about what you feel. They can be just as dangerous, just as consuming, and just as destructive as any physical affair. I had two choices: continue feeding this emotional fire and risk everything, or step back before it got out of control. I didn't know which one I wanted. Some nights, I longed for the thrill, the validation, the intensity. Other nights, I wanted to run, to protect my marriage, to protect myself. And in that uncertainty, I found myself standing on a cliff, staring down at a path I didn't know if I could walk back from. The days after that night were brutal. I went to work, smiled at coworkers, acted like everything was normal, but inside, I was unraveling. Every ping from Alex's phone number made my heart race. Every smile from my husband felt heavy with guilt I didn't know how to carry. I was living in two worlds, one safe, familiar, domestic, and one electric, dangerous, consuming. It escalated slowly. Texts turned into messages that went deeper into our lives, our dreams, frustrations, fears, tiny secrets. Alex listened in a way my husband hadn't lately, and that was the part that scared me the most, the thrill of being understood, of being seen, at the expense of the marriage I vowed to protect. I noticed myself withdrawing. Conversations with my husband became superficial. I nodded, smiled, laughed at the right times, but my mind was elsewhere, analyzing the last message from Alex, thinking about what I'd say next, replaying our inside jokes over and over. I hated myself for it. Then one night, he noticed, my husband. He was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, watching me chop vegetables in silence. "You've been distant," he said softly. "I feel like you're somewhere else. Is something going on?" I froze. My heart raced. I wanted to lie. "Just say you're stressed. That's it. That's safe." I don't know," I said finally. "I feel disconnected." He frowned. Hurt flashed in his eyes. Not anger, not accusation, just concern. Disconnected from me? I hesitated, the truth clawing at my throat. I wanted to say no. I wanted to say it wasn't anyone, but I didn't. Not exactly," I stammered. I feel I can't explain it." And the silence that followed was worse than any argument. The truth, even unspoken, hung between us like smoke. At work, I tried to distance myself from Alex. I didn't answer texts immediately. I avoided the little flirty comments, the jokes only we understood. I tried to remind myself of my husband, of the life we'd built together, of the promises I had made, but every time his name appeared on my phone, that pull returned, stronger than ever. I began therapy that week. Thrive. Marks, yes, my therapist, asked me to be brutally honest. "What do you want? Do you want Alex, or do you want to repair your marriage?" I didn't have an answer. Some part of me fantasized about leaving, about the intensity, the thrill, but the larger part of me wanted to rebuild, to save the life I had with my husband, to heal myself without losing everything. Meanwhile, the tension at home was growing. I was snappy sometimes, distracted, withdrawn. My husband would ask small questions, and I'd flinch, my mind racing, trying to conceal the truth. I hated lying to him. I hated that I was hiding a part of myself. Every glance, every gesture, every word felt loaded with guilt. One Friday evening, after a particularly long day at work, Alex texted me. I stared at the message, heart pounding. The temptation to reply was overwhelming, and then I saw my husband in the living room, reading on the couch, peaceful, trusting, innocent, and I realized I couldn't, not tonight, not like this. So I set boundaries. I told Alex I needed space. He understood, but that didn't stop the longing, the craving, the thrill of connection that had grown so dangerously strong. The emotional affair was real, the feelings were real, and the guilt, crushing. That weekend, my husband and I tried to reconnect. We cooked together, talked about mundane things, laughed a little, but the distance lingered, like a shadow I couldn't shake. I wanted to tell him everything, but I didn't know how to begin. I wasn't ready for the fallout, for the hurt, for the betrayal that my words would inevitably cause. So I waited, I hoped, I tried, and in the waiting, I realized something terrifying. Emotional affairs don't need a physical act to destroy a marriage. They destroy slowly, quietly, leaving traces in every conversation, every touch, every glance. It hit me one Wednesday night like a freight train. I was sitting at my kitchen table, laptop open, pretending to finish work, when a message from Alex popped up. I froze. The words weren't even flirty, just casual, friendly, checking in, and yet, my chest tightened, my stomach knotted, and my fingers itched to reply. That itch wasn't just temptation, it was an addiction, one I hadn't fully admitted to myself. I put the phone down, staring at Penny curled in her bed, snoring softly. My husband was in the living room, watching TV. I could hear the soft murmur of his voice reacting to the show. I wanted to join him, to feel normal again, to be present, but I couldn't. My mind was tangled in guilt and desire, fear and longing, and the worst part? I didn't know how to untangle it. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Alex's face, imagined his words, replayed our conversations, And I realized something terrifying: I had crossed the line emotionally, not physically, yes, but emotionally, in ways that mattered, in ways that could destroy everything. The next morning, my husband noticed. Again, he asked the casual, "Are you okay?" But this time, the concern in his eyes was sharper, more probing, and I couldn't lie anymore. "I've been distant," I admitted, my voice shaking. "I feel disconnected, and I don't know why." He frowned, hurt flashing across his face. "Disconnected from me?" "I don't know," I whispered. I just feel lost, like something's missing." The silence was unbearable. I wanted to tell him everything: the texts, the emotional connection, the way I'd been falling for Alex, but I couldn't, not yet, not until I understood myself. At work, the emotional pull intensified. I wanted to reach out, to text Alex, to feel that thrill again, but every time I picked up my phone, I remembered my husband's face, the hurt, the trust, the subtle sadness, and I put it down. I started journaling, writing down my thoughts, my guilt, my desires. Each word felt like a confession to myself. Therapy became essential. Thrive. Marks pushed me harder than anyone else had. "You're either going to cross the line or confront it now," she said one session. "You can't stay in limbo." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. She was right. I couldn't continue this way, not if I wanted to survive, not if I wanted my marriage to survive. So I made a choice. I blocked Alex temporarily, told him I needed space. The pull was still there, still heavy, still raw, but the boundary existed now, and it hurt. God, it hurt more than anything else in the world. That weekend, I tried to reconnect with my husband. I cooked, I laughed, I forced myself to be present, and yet, the guilt lingered like a shadow. Every time he reached for my hand, I flinched internally, remembering the way my heart had raced for someone else. Finally, the confrontation came, not planned, not dramatic, but quiet, intimate, unavoidable. I admitted to my emotional distance, my feelings of being lost, my guilt. I didn't mention Alex by name yet, because I wasn't ready for the devastation that would bring, but I admitted enough that my husband understood. Something had changed, something had shifted, and I had to rebuild it. We cried together that night, we argued, we stayed silent, but in the chaos, a fragile bridge began to form. Not trust, trust takes time, but acknowledgement, awareness, the first step toward healing. And I realized, painfully, that emotional affairs are not small. They don't stay hidden, they don't disappear quietly, they consume, destroy, and force you to confront your deepest fears about yourself, your partner, and your own capacity for betrayal. I didn't know if my marriage would survive. I didn't know if my heart would forgive me. I only knew one thing: I couldn't go back to being blind, not to myself, not to my husband, not to the consequences of my choices. It was Sunday morning when I finally admitted everything. I had rehearsed it in my head for days, imagining his reaction, imagining tears, maybe anger, maybe a cold silence, but nothing prepared me for the raw intensity of the moment when the words finally left my lips. "There's someone else," I whispered, barely audible. He froze, his fork halfway to his mouth, his eyes widened, hurt, shock, confusion mingling in a way that made my chest ache. "Someone else?" I nodded, feeling the weight of every word, every lie I had told myself, every small betrayal I had allowed to fester. "It's not physical," I hurried to explain, panic rising, "but emotionally I've been connected to someone else, texting, talking, sharing things I should have shared with you, and I hate myself for it." He put down his fork slowly, the silence stretching between us like a chasm I wasn't sure we could cross. His eyes, usually warm and trusting, were clouded with disbelief and pain. "You've been what?" he finally asked, voice trembling. I took a deep breath, tears spilling freely. I told him everything: the late night messages, the inside jokes, the emotional dependence I had developed. I confessed the guilt that had been eating me alive, the way I had withdrawn, the nights I had laid awake thinking about someone else while lying next to him. He didn't speak for a long time. I waited, heart hammering, unsure if silence was judgment or processing or the beginning of the end. Finally, he whispered, almost to himself, I don't know what to say." I didn't expect him to have words. I didn't expect forgiveness. I only expected honesty, from me, from him, from both of us. The following days were a blur. We argued, we cried, we sat in uncomfortable silence. I felt like I was bleeding emotionally, my mistakes laid bare for the person I loved most. And yet, despite the devastation, there was a strange sense of relief. The secret that had consumed me was out in the open. Therapy became our lifeline. Thrive. Marks guided me through the guilt, the shame, the fear, and helped my husband process his hurt. He asked questions I wasn't ready to answer immediately. Why him? Was I not enough? Did you want to leave me? And each question cut like a knife. I tried to answer honestly. I told him the truth. It wasn't about him being insufficient. It was about me being lost, craving validation, seeking an emotional spark I had neglected to nurture at home. It wasn't justification, it was explanation. We set rules: no contact with Alex, total honesty about feelings, conversations, fears. It wasn't a quick fix. Trust, once fractured, is like glass, it can be pieced together, but the cracks remain visible. In the weeks that followed, I worked on myself, trying to understand why I had let the emotional affair grow. I journaled, painted, ran, reconnected with friends I had neglected. My husband and I started to rebuild slowly: small gestures, shared dinners, conversations about our day, really listening to each other again. Alex faded from my life like a dream I could no longer touch. The longing didn't vanish immediately. Some nights, I thought about what could have been, the intensity, the thrill, the emotional rush, but the pull weakened over time, replaced with the weight of responsibility, love, and a desire to repair what I had almost destroyed. And somewhere in the mess of tears, apologies, therapy sessions, and late-night conversations, I realized a painful truth: emotional affairs are just as damaging as physical ones. They destroy trust, fracture hearts, and force people to confront the deepest vulnerabilities they had ignored. Rebuilding didn't happen overnight. In fact, it didn't feel like it was happening at all some days. Some mornings, I woke up still feeling the weight of my mistakes pressing down on my chest, a reminder that trust once broken isn't easily restored. But slowly, imperceptibly, small changes began to take root. We started with rituals that felt almost trivial at first: making coffee together in the mornings, walking Penny around the neighborhood without checking our phones, sharing the first thought that crossed our minds when we woke up. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. And realness, after months of emotional deception, felt like a lifeline. I also had to confront myself. Therapy had taught me to stop running from guilt and fear and to face them head on. I started journaling nightly, writing not just about Alex or my mistakes, but about my needs, my frustrations, my hopes for the future. Painting became a release, each brushstroke a silent apology to myself and to my husband for the chaos I'd created. Conversations with my husband, which had once been punctuated by tension and unspoken questions, became more open. We argued, yes, sometimes loudly, sometimes with tears, but even the arguments were healing in a strange way. They were honest, they were rooted in care, not deception. One evening, we were sitting on the couch, Penny curled at our feet, watching a show we'd both loved for years. I realized I could smile again without guilt, could laugh without thinking of someone else, and for the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope, fragile, yes, but unmistakably real. Alex was gone from my life completely. No texts, no messages, no emotional whispers calling me away. At first, that absence hurt more than anything else. It was like withdrawing from a drug I'd become addicted to without realizing it. But over time, the ache softened, replaced by clarity and a sense of moral grounding I hadn't felt in months. Our marriage wasn't perfect, and it likely never would be the same as before the affair began. Trust doesn't simply return, but what grew in its place was deeper, intentional. We learned to communicate before distance grew, to check in on each other emotionally, to nurture the connection we'd allowed to wither. I also discovered something vital about myself: that I am capable of mistakes, yes, devastating mistakes, but also capable of reflection, repair, and growth. I am not defined solely by my worst choices. I am defined by the courage it takes to face them, apologize, and commit to doing better. Some nights, I still think about Alex, not with longing, not with desire, but with awareness. Awareness of what could have been, awareness of how close I came to losing everything I love. Those thoughts are no longer temptations, they are reminders, warnings, lessons etched into memory. Through all of this, I realized survival isn't just about enduring the aftermath of betrayal. Survival is about reclaiming your autonomy, your integrity, your sense of self, and choosing intentionally what kind of partner and person you want to be. By the time months passed into a year, I could look at my husband and see not just the man I loved, but the man who had endured, who had chosen to stay, who had weathered my mistakes with me, and I could love him, fully, openly, and honestly, without reservation, without distraction, without secrets. It took a long time to get here, months of therapy, of quiet reflection, of rebuilding, of apologizing and listening, months of relearning what it meant to trust, to commit, to stay present, and finally, I feel like I can breathe again. Some mornings, I wake up next to my husband and catch myself just staring, thinking, we survived this, we're still here. It's not naive optimism, it's recognition of the work, the tears, the raw honesty that got us through the worst months of our lives. I've stopped blaming myself for the emotional affair entirely, not because it wasn't wrong, but because punishment doesn't rebuild trust, action does. I've taken responsibility fully, and in doing so, I've also reclaimed my agency. I am not just the person who made mistakes, I am the person who confronted them, learned from them, and chose to fight for what matters. Alex is gone from my life completely. His presence is a memory, a cautionary tale, a lesson in vulnerability and desire. I don't long for what we had, that thrill was never worth the cost, but I sometimes think about it to remind myself how fragile human relationships are, how easy it is to wander emotionally if you neglect connection at home. My marriage isn't perfect, and it may never be, but we've built something new, forged from honesty and persistence rather than ignorance and comfort. We laugh again, we talk openly, we touch intentionally, we nurture the connection that almost slipped through our fingers. Therapy has become less about crisis management and more about growth. We learn to communicate without fear, to express needs without resentment, to confront uncomfortable truths instead of burying them. And in this, I've learned something essential. Love is not a static feeling, it's a continuous choice, a daily effort, a deliberate act of connection. I've also learned to forgive myself. The guilt doesn't vanish overnight, sometimes it whispers in the quiet moments, reminding me of how close I came to losing everything. But forgiveness is not forgetting, it's accepting your flaws, your humanity, and committing to not repeating the same mistakes. Friends have noticed the change in me, the calm in my eyes, the steadiness in my presence. Penny curls up beside me every night, a silent witness to the life I fought to reclaim, and my husband is here, fully present, healing alongside me, choosing me, even after everything, choosing us. Some nights, I still reflect, still write in my journal, still feel the weight of the past, but now, those reflections are not shackles, they are reminders, lessons etched into my heart, guiding me toward a life of intentionality, honesty, and emotional integrity. I've realized that survival after betrayal, emotional or otherwise, isn't just about enduring, it's about growth, about choosing connection over secrecy, love over temptation, and awareness over ignorance. It's about facing yourself in the mirror and saying, I made mistakes, I learned, I will continue to learn. And that, finally, feels like freedom. Emotional affair with a coworker nearly destroyed my marriage. I confessed, cut off contact, and through therapy and intentional rebuilding, my husband and I survived. Emotional affairs are destructive, but facing the truth, taking responsibility, and committing to growth can heal even the deepest wounds.